This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed. These ones should be easy. Everybody agrees that the box cutter like swords from Attack on Titan are usable swords, and that it also makes sense that they have replaceable blades. I also think that the break lines make sense because if I hit a armored opponent with a normal sword, we either hit with the edge or with a stronger tip. In the case of the Attack on Titan swords, it's a very thin point of the edge, and so it could make sense to break off the distal tip to get a new functional tip. So far, so good. There's unfortunately more to talk, as you could see from the title. These two strange finger rings, we really need to talk about these. We've played quite a bit with these swords, but it proves difficult to find a way to place your fingers in these rings that it does not hurt. I'm aware that these cosplay versions have rather large rings and there are other forms where the rings are smaller and closer by. The problem for me is having two fingers in these types of rings. So we simply try to use only the lower ring. Problem is then the handle is rather short and does no longer fit the rest of the hand. So the control of the sword is a bit limited in this way of holding it. So, of course, it could be that I'm simply too stupid to understand why these two rings are there and that I'm not using the sword how it was intended to be used. So, we experimented quite a bit how you could hold this sword, how you could position your fingers on the handle, and nothing really felt well. Therefore, we decided to look at some other weapons that use finger rings, and there's a lot of information about rapiers having used these types of finger rings. There are also quite some videos on YouTube about the right grip of these weapons. In fact, there are many different ways how you could grab them, but a lot of them involve having your index finger or middle finger in these rings. Also, in sportive variations or small swords, you often have these types of rings so that the blade comes more into the plane of the forearm and makes thrusting easier. Historically, that was, of course, due to the emphasis of the thrust over the cut over time, and ultimately led to the foil as we know it in modern sport fencing. Interestingly, here without any ring on the finger. If we look at the foil and the left hand parry dagger, we recognize that putting the thumb in a certain way on the grip is much more essential than spreading the fingers, because spreading the fingers hurts. You know that maybe from brass knuckles or push daggers, both illegal in Germany, so that's why you see rubber versions here. Why should I use then these types of rings with the rapier? One argument is you could use it with a glove, but it still hurts if you really hit something. At least my experience shows me that. Also, if it comes to versatility of the weapon, I think that putting the fingers in the rings makes cutting really tricky. If I instead put my thumb on the position like the left hand parry dagger, I can make rotational cuts, but I also have the advantage that my blade points more forward and allows thrusting. So I'm not a big fan of putting my fingers into the rings, to be honest. There are some people that agree on that, but there are also a lot of people that seem to be really keen on rings because it's ridiculous how many knives I have in my collection that have rings. And it's not only the karambit that is well known for it, there are so many more knives that have now rings where you have to put some of your fingers in order to cut. With the classical karambit, it's at least the index finger that is put in, which makes it easy to get the weapon in and out somehow. There are others of these strange claw-like knives where you have to put in the middle finger or the ring finger, which already makes it very, very tricky to draw them out of their sheath. So what's the advantage of these rings? Yeah, it's tricky to drop the knife. It's possible to hold more than just this weapon in your hand. You can simply add another of these ring knives or really a stick. So that's nice. But if you think about real fight, if I get disarmed, my finger's probably off, and already using it in this way hurts in most cases. You will see dents and marks on your fingers when you use these weapons, definitely. And even if you argue that these could be something like emergency weapons, and that's why they are so slim and leave marks on your fingers, for an emergency weapon, they are again tricky to draw because of the rings and where to place these rings. And it takes time to get them out. You can really try that. Also, I have large hands. Maybe some of these finger holes are simply not made for my hands, and people with smaller hands can be happy with them. But very often, I think if there would be just the blade and I could place the index finger or the thumb on this region, it would work much better. My guess is that a lot of these knives with the rings have been inspired by the karambit and the playful actions you can do with it, but that only works because the index finger is in the ring, and putting any other finger in is really, really not helping a lot. And if the handle is short and the ring is too small, it's more or less useless. I hope you can see I really tried it. I have a lot of these knives and I've experimented quite a bit. But for example here, this folder with a hole in the blade, I don't get the function of that. If you have any idea how these rings can become less painful, or what is the great advantage of using them and therefore having the pain is a price to pay, please comment below. I would really love to get an idea on that. Of course, rings have not only reached the knife collector scene and provided us with a lot of funny tools with which we can barely useful cut, it has also entered the fantasy world. And if we, for example, go to the Naruto verse, we will find different weapons like this non-functional knuckle duster because it lacks a rest, or this pseudo kunai with the ring on the wrong position. So how do I deal with the rings on the Attack on Titan swords? Very easy. I take his cousin and cut the rings off. Now it's a quite useful little sword with a nice hand protection and without rings to worry about. But let's not stop here. What about this hand protection? Can we use the little pimple on the backside of the hand protection as a prong? Yes and no. So for disarming, it doesn't look good. You see, we tried it here and it always requires the left hand. The prong is simply too short. So in most cases, it will simply not catch the blade of the opponent. The blade will jump over the little pimple and require the left hand. I managed it, in fact, one time, as you can see here. Now it caught it. Still had to secure it with the other hand, just in case it would jump over. So no prong usable for disarms, but prongs can be used for other things. We know, for example, that we can flip the blade. And the handle, as it looks like, could be stored in a belt in a fashion like that. If it would not be made out of rubber, it would stand up more top-wise, and then I could draw it out from the belt like that. This is a bit reminiscent to the one really good movie with Patrick Swayze, Steel Dawn, where he would wear his sword on the leg, but it also reminds of the wearing of the policeman's special weapon, the rapid rotation baton. There we of course have a special holstering device for storing it and securing it, getting it out fast and getting it back in a decent way. But that would fit to the high-tech fashion of an Attack on Titan sword. Or You can also use the little pimple for storing it in a more relaxed way on your belt, at least when you're standing around. That's an option definitely. Or you can hang it on your neck. Nobody sees you have a sword. Hello, final scene in the first Die Hard. This would be your sword equivalent. But of course, you can wear the sword also more in a Japanese traditional way, and the little pseudo prong will still help you. When drawing, you can perform the Katori Shinto Ryu style draw and flip it into a normal hold very fast. That's elegant. So my suggestion, after removing the finger rings, the Attack on Titan swords are really useful as a simple cosplay type of sword for training and playing around. The advantage is they come usually in a pair, and this pair is rather cheap. Without the rings, the handle is really comfortable and will tell you about edge alignment. That's a big plus. Also, the hand protection is not only foam and will easily rip off, it's additionally secured by a piece of wire, which makes it more stable and longer lasting. Hence, if you're looking for a pair of cheap, simple to get training swords, this would be an easy start. It requires just a little cut with a box cutter, and then the handle is really a usable one. So far for today, hope we could give you some inspiration. See you around next time.